On Christmas morning, a 6-year-old girl was found murdered inside her own home in Boulder, Colorado. A ransom note, a hidden basement, and a trail of clues that never added up turned this case into one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in America. And it all began with the Ramsey family. Boulder, Colorado, 1996. A quiet town, a wealthy neighborhood, the kind of place where families left their doors unlocked because crime seemed far away. And inside one of the largest homes on 15th Street lived the Ramsey family, a family many thought had it all. John Ramsey, the father, was a successful businessman. He was president of Access Graphics, a computer company that had just made a fortune. To neighbors, John was calm, quiet, a man who worked hard and provided more than comfortably for his family. His wife, Patsy, was different, bright, social, the kind of person who loved being seen at church events and social gatherings. She was also a proud mother who adored showing off her little girl, JonBenet. And JonBenet, only 6 years old, was the center of attention everywhere she went. Blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, a big smile. She was already a beauty pageant star. She wore tiaras, sequined gowns, performed songs on stage, and collected trophies at such a young age. Some admired her talent, others whispered about the pressures of child pageants, but either way, JonBenet was unforgettable. The Ramseys also had a 9-year-old son, Burke. Quiet, shy, very different from his sister. While JonBenet was in the spotlight, Burke stayed in the background, spending time with his computer games and keeping mostly to himself. On the outside, the Ramseys seemed picture-perfect. A big house, 2 children, a successful career, Christmas lights twinkling on the lawn that winter. Friends described them as a family with everything: money, comfort, beauty, and a promising future. But what looked perfect from afar wasn't as perfect up close, because behind those walls there were little cracks. Patsy had survived cancer but carried lingering health struggles. The family lived under pressure from fame, money, and the constant attention around JonBenet's pageant life. Some people loved them, others envied them, and some simply judged them. Still, no one in Boulder could have imagined what would happen on that cold December night in 1996, a night that should have been filled with holiday joy, a night that should have ended with gifts under the tree and kids playing with new toys. But instead, something dark crept into the Ramsey house, something that would shatter their lives and haunt the town forever, because that little girl with the tiara, the smile, and the trophies would never live to see another Christmas morning. And the way her story began makes the way it ended even harder to understand. Christmas Eve, 1996. Snow on the rooftops of Boulder, the streets quiet, families gathered around fireplaces. For the Ramseys, the night began like any other holiday celebration. They had been invited to a party at a friend's house, and the whole family dressed up to attend. JonBenet wore a velvet red dress, cheerful and bright, as if she was born for Christmas gatherings. She smiled and twirled for neighbors, the way a little girl full of life always does. Friends remember the family arriving in good spirits, laughing, eating, sharing holiday wishes. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal night of holiday joy. But, in hindsight, nothing about that night feels normal anymore. Because after the laughter, after the food and music, the Ramseys would return home. And within hours, tragedy would strike. The family returned to their sprawling home sometime around 9 or 10 p.m. The large house stood quiet, covered in Christmas decorations, the tree still glowing in the corner. JonBenet, tired from the long evening, was carried upstairs by Patsy. She was tucked into bed with her favorite blanket. Burke, older and more independent, went off to his own room. The Ramsey house that night was peaceful, at least on the surface. But later, investigators would question everything about those hours. Who locked the doors? Who checked the windows? Did anyone notice anything unusual? Because neighbors later said they thought they heard strange noises in the night. A scream, a thud, even the sound of metal clashing. But at the time, no one called police. No one knew anything was wrong, and inside the Ramsey home, nothing seemed out of place, at least not until morning. But before that morning came something, or someone, moved silently through that house. While the children slept, and the parents rested in their rooms, an event unfolded that no one in Boulder could explain. The basement, a dark and seldom used part of the Ramsey home, would later become the center of the investigation. But that night, it was just another closed-off space. The house itself was massive, nearly 7,000 square feet, full of hallways, staircases, and rooms where someone could hide unnoticed. Police would later say it was the perfect place for confusion. Too big, too open, too easy to lose track of movements. And here's the chilling part. No one heard forced entry. No shattered glass, no broken locks. Whoever entered, if someone did, may have known their way around, or may have slipped in without leaving a trace. At first glance, the Ramseys ended their night peacefully, but hidden beneath that quiet surface was a timeline full of unanswered questions. Who moved through the kitchen that night? Who wrote words on a notepad later found in the home? And how could a house full of people miss what was about to happen? Viewers, stay with me. Because the next morning, Christmas Day, Patsy Ramsey would make a discovery that turned this family's life into a nightmare. And it started with a single note. Christmas morning, December 25th, 1996. Patsy Ramsey woke before sunrise. She planned to make breakfast, prepare for the family's holiday trip, and watch her children open presents under the decorated tree. The house should have been filled with joy, but instead, it was about to be filled with terror. As she made her way down the spiral staircase, something caught her eye. On the wooden steps, a note was lying there. At first, it looked like any handwritten message, but when she picked it up, the words sent a chill through her body. It was a ransom note. Written in shaky handwriting, the note claimed that JonBenet had been kidnapped by a small foreign faction. It demanded $118,000, almost the exact amount John Ramsey had received as a Christmas bonus that year. The note warned the family not to call the police. It threatened JonBenet's life if they disobeyed. Patsy screamed for John. The family's Christmas morning turned into chaos in seconds. John read the note, his face frozen in shock. Instead of wrapping paper and gifts, they were staring at a demand that no parent could ever imagine. Patsy immediately called 911, her voice panicked, trembling. She told the dispatcher her daughter had been kidnapped. Her words carried desperation, but also confusion. Why this amount of money? Why their family? Why on Christmas morning? And that phone call set everything into motion. Within minutes, Boulder police arrived at the Ramsey home. Officers expected to deal with the kidnapping, but what they walked into was something else entirely. The house was busy. Friends and neighbors were already arriving, trying to comfort the Ramseys after Patsy's frantic calls. People moved through rooms, touched counters, walked on carpets. Without realizing it, the crime scene was being contaminated right in front of police eyes. Evidence that could have solved the case was being destroyed in real time. Investigators scanned the ransom note. It was unusually long, 3 pages filled with strange phrases and dramatic threats. Experts later said kidnappers almost never write notes like this. And the handwriting. Some claimed it looked staged, as if the writer had tried too hard to disguise their style. Still, at that moment, officers focused on the idea of kidnapping. They waited for a call from the so-called kidnappers. They told the Ramseys to remain calm. Hours passed. The phone never rang. And then something changed. Detective Linda Arndt, one of the officers on scene, began to feel uneasy. Too much time had gone by without contact. Too many details didn't fit. She quietly suggested that John Ramsey and a friend search the house again, to see if anything seemed out of place. What happened next would haunt Boulder police forever. John Ramsey headed toward the basement. It was a part of the house rarely used, cold, cluttered, a maze of storage rooms. He opened a door. At first, the room looked ordinary, but then, in the shadows, he saw something small under a white blanket. He pulled it back. It was JonBenet. Her little body lay on the floor. Tape covered her mouth. A cord was tied around her neck. Her hands were bound. And yet she had been carefully wrapped in a blanket, almost as if someone had tried to stage both cruelty and care at the same time. John lifted his daughter in his arms, sobbing, and carried her upstairs. In his grief, he unknowingly destroyed critical evidence. But in that moment, no father would have thought about fingerprints or DNA. He only thought about his child. The house fell into hysteria. Patsy collapsed, screaming. Detectives froze in shock. What had begun as a kidnapping case was now a murder investigation. But the details didn't add up. The ransom note demanded money, but the child was already dead in the basement. The so-called kidnappers never called, never showed. And the strangest part? The note had been written on paper taken from inside the Ramsey home itself. Viewers, think about that for a moment. Whoever wrote that ransom note didn't bring paper with them. They sat down inside the Ramsey house in the middle of the night and wrote it out. And that chilling fact changed the investigation forever. The moment JonBenet's body was carried upstairs, the investigation shifted. But the damage had already been done. The house was full of people. Friends, neighbors, even a minister had walked through the crime scene. Evidence was touched, moved, even cleaned without realizing it. Detectives later admitted that Boulder police were not prepared for a case of this magnitude. Boulder was a quiet town, used to burglaries and small disputes, not a high-profile child murder. Mistakes were made from the very beginning. The ransom note, for example, was handled without gloves. The basement was not sealed off. Officers gave conflicting orders, and witnesses were left wandering around. By the time forensic teams arrived, it was nearly impossible to know what had been tampered with. And then came the first major controversy. Suspicion quickly turned toward the family itself. Police noted Patsy's 911 call. Her panic was real, but her words seemed unusual. She kept repeating certain phrases. She mentioned details some officers thought only the killer would know. Was it stress or something darker? John's behavior also raised eyebrows. Carrying JonBenet's body upstairs might have been instinctive, but it contaminated the most important evidence in the case. Investigators couldn't decide if the Ramseys were grieving parents or guilty suspects. But the ransom note remained the biggest puzzle. Experts studied every inch of that 3-page message. It was dramatic, filled with lines that sounded like they came from a movie script. Phrases like "don't try to grow a brain" and "we are a small foreign faction" didn't fit the profile of a professional kidnapper. Handwriting analysis was performed. Patsy's handwriting showed similarities, but not enough to prove guilt. The note was written on paper from the Ramsey home, with a pen also belonging to them. Some experts believed this meant it had to be staged, written inside the house, after the crime. But then there was the DNA. Investigators found unknown male DNA on JonBenet's clothing. It didn't match John, Patsy, or Burke. This clue pointed toward an intruder. Yet critics argued the DNA could have been from a factory worker who handled the clothes. Nothing was clear. The autopsy added more confusion. JonBenet had been strangled, but she also had a fractured skull. Some believed the blow to the head came first and the strangulation was staged to cover it. Others thought the opposite. The evidence told two different stories. And just when police thought they had suspects, the media exploded. Within days, JonBenet's case was on every newspaper, every television channel, every radio show. The blonde beauty queen with pageant. Crowns became the face of a nationwide obsession, and the spotlight turned harshly on her parents. Tabloids painted John and Patsy as villains, cold, manipulative, hiding secrets. Some accused Burke, their 9-year-old son, of jealousy or rage. The family went from victims of tragedy to suspects in the public eye almost overnight. Police fueled the suspicion by leaking details: Patsy's possible handwriting match, John's unusual calmness, Burke's silence during questioning. But at the same time, the department had failed to properly investigate the possibility of an intruder. Windows in the basement showed signs of tampering. A suitcase was found near the window well, as if someone had tried to climb out. Yet those clues were brushed aside in the rush to focus on the family. The investigation spiraled into two camps. One side convinced the Ramseys were guilty, the other convinced an unknown intruder had committed the crime. Neither side had enough evidence to close the case. And then came the most haunting realization. Critical mistakes meant the truth might never be known. Viewers, think about it. The ransom note written inside the house, the DNA that didn't, match the family, the chaotic crime scene. Each clue pointed in a different direction, and every mistake pushed justice further away. But years later, a twist would arrive that shook the entire case once again. Years passed, but the shadow of JonBenet's murder never faded. By the early 2000s, investigators turned to technology that hadn't been available in 1996, advanced DNA testing. In 2008, results came back with a shocking revelation. The DNA found on JonBenet's clothing did not match John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey. In fact, it cleared the entire family. For many, this was proof that the Ramseys were innocent, that someone else had been inside that house. But if not them, then who? The ransom note still pointed toward someone with knowledge of the family's life. The bizarre wording, the amount of money, the fact it was written inside the house, all of it felt deeply personal. And yet the unknown male DNA suggested an outsider. Then came another twist that made headlines around the world. In 2006, a man named John Mark Carr confessed to killing JonBenet. He was arrested in Thailand and flown back to the United States. For a brief moment, it seemed the case might finally be solved. But that moment didn't last. Carr's DNA did not match the evidence. His story had inconsistencies. Investigators realized he had fabricated his confession, obsessed with the case but not actually connected to it. Just like that, another lead vanished, and the mystery deepened. The more investigators studied the case, the stranger it became. The ransom note's length, 3 full pages, was almost unheard of in criminal history. Most ransom notes are short to the point, but this one rambled, mixing threats with bizarre phrases. Experts debated, was it the work of a clever manipulator or simply someone staging a fake kidnapping? Other theories swirled. Some believed an intruder slipped in through the basement window and committed the crime while the family slept. Others believed a family member snapped under pressure and staged the scene to look like an outside attack. Every clue seemed to cancel out another. The DNA cleared the family, but skeptics said it could have been from contamination. The note was too strange for a real kidnapper, but too elaborate for a child or panicked parent. And so, after years of investigation, the case reached a chilling climax. The evidence created more questions than answers. Viewers, this is the moment where the story shifts from a tragedy into a haunting legend. Because if the Ramseys didn't do it, and if John Mark Carr didn't do it, then who killed JonBenét Ramsey? Today, nearly 3 decades later, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of America's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. No one has ever been charged, no jury has ever heard the case, and no family has ever received closure. John Ramsey continues to fight for answers, pushing for modern DNA testing on evidence that was overlooked years ago. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenet's mother, tragically passed away from cancer in 2006, never knowing the truth about what happened to her daughter. Burke, JonBenet's older brother, has lived under the shadow of suspicion for most of his life, despite never being charged with any crime. The case is still open. Detectives claim they are working with new technology, but every year that passes makes the mystery feel heavier, more unreachable. And so, we're left with questions that may never be answered. Was it an intruder who slipped into the Ramsey home that Christmas night? Was it someone close to the family? Or was it something far stranger, something no one has ever considered? Even now, people around the world debate the case, searching for clues that might finally bring justice. But until that day comes, the story of JonBenét Ramsey will remain frozen in time, a chilling reminder that even in the safest places, darkness can creep in. What do you think happened that night in Boulder, Colorado? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this mystery still needs voices, and maybe one day the truth will finally come out.